We begin our report with the return of 4 Americans previously held in Russia. Marine veteran Paul Whelan held for 2,043 days. Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich held for 491. Radio journalist Alsu Kurmasheva held for 843. And political activist Vladimir Kara-Murza, who spent 288 days in captivity. The U.S. says they were each held for crimes they did not commit. 3 returned to their families in the United States Thursday. 1 is flying to Germany. It was a complicated deal with Russia, including swaps with Germany and mediation by Turkey. In addition to the 4 Americans, 3 Germans and 9 Russian political prisoners were also freed. In total, 24 prisoners are out from behind bars, including 8 Russians held in Western nations. President Biden thanked his allies for helping get the deal done.
So for anyone who questions whether allies matter, they do. They matter. And today is a powerful example of why it's vital to have friends in this world. Friends you can trust, work with, and depend upon, especially on matters of great consequence and sensitivity like this. Our alliances make our people safer, and we began to see that again today.
CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis joins me now. Olivia, how did this swap happen? How did it come about?
Sure. Well, John, you ran through some of the numbers just there, and that's why U.S. officials have been describing this as the most complex and one of the largest negotiations of its sort in modern history, and certainly in U.S.-Russian history and U.S.-Soviet history. That's because the sheer number of moving pieces, the countries involved, as well as the types of prisoners involved. This wasn't a one-on-one spy swap. These were political prisoners that the Russians could inherently be more capricious with how they were handling. We've since heard about some of the intense diplomacy that the White House and the State Department spearheaded in order to get friendly countries on board. You mentioned Poland, Slovenia, Norway, and most critically, Germany, who was holding the key to what the Russians wanted most, this convicted murderer, Vadim Krasikov, who's now making his way back to Russia. And that's to say nothing of the multiple agencies that were actually involved in the logistics and the negotiations that got us to this point.
Can you give us a timeline? Either maybe it's too much for this big of a deal, but was there a crucial crux? The president mentioned dealing with Olaf Scholz and the Chancellor of Germany. Is there a way sort of to think about this in terms of the timeline?
Sure. And it is a wild and winding story that, will go down in the history books. So while the White House and State Department were getting friendly allies on board, the Russians preferred to deal in a different channel. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, right after the Brittany Griner swap happened in December of last year, tried to engage Sergei Lavrov, his Russian counterpart, in diplomatic channels to discuss the fate of Paul Whelan. Sergei Lavrov rebuffed him. He said, we caught these people red-handed, and we want to deal in intelligence channels and not in diplomatic channels. The U.S. had been reluctant to do that for fear of giving credence to any of these baseless allegations that either Evan Gershkovich or Paul Whelan actually were involved in any sort of espionage activities. But the Russians have relied on what they call the special channel, which is their intelligence agencies dealing with our intelligence agencies. And that's why you had CIA Director William Burns calling his counterparts in the FSB and SVR, the intelligence services in Russia, in order to arrive at a deal in principle, we learned in early July, and then have that special channel senior CIA officials and Russian officials meet in a neutral third country to elaborate the U.S. negotiating position and get the deal over the finish line.
So it's sort of spooks talking to spooks about, I guess, maybe that allows them some facility with talking about some of the more nasty parts of the way governments interact, I guess. I don't know. But so why does the intelligence channel, how does that make things easier? And I'll tack onto that, Olivia, the question, which is, what did the Russians get out of this in terms of, I mean, they obviously got prisoners. Anything else?
Sure. Well, the Russians prefer to deal in this channel. It's more discreet. It's not subject to public scrutiny. It's not diplomatic for that reason. It is behind the scenes. And they are, of course, discussing people who are convicted criminals. Krasikov was a former FSB agent, incarcerated in Germany for life for assassinating, at the Russian government's behest, somebody who had battled Russian military in Chechnya. And the other nationals that they are getting back, among them cyber criminals, money launderers, and a sort of sleeper cell of Russian agents who are operating as illegals in Slovenia, embedded in local society, pretending to be, natural citizens, but in fact doing spying for Russia. So these are not innocent people that they are getting back, and that is why they prefer to deal in these more secretive channels.
Got it. That's fascinating. Olivia Gazis, thank you for unpacking all of that for us. We appreciate it. And to the White House now, where Natalie Brand has more details on exactly what went into the prisoner swap between the U.S. and Russia. Natalie?
President Biden celebrated this moment today at the White House with the families of the now freed Americans, even noting that the daughter of radio journalist Alsu Kurmasheva turns 13 tomorrow, and he said that now she will be able to celebrate with her mother. He also noted that these months-long complex negotiations were a, quote, feat of diplomacy, and he thanked the U.S. allies who also worked to make this deal happen, especially Germany, also noting Poland, Slovenia, Norway, and Turkey. Now, we also learned from the White House that President Biden had a call to finalize details the same day, that Sunday, that he announced he was going to exit from the 2024 race. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, speaking at the White House press briefing today, became notably emotional in detailing all the work that went on behind the scenes across the White House, State Department, and the CIA. He also described this as vintage Joe Biden in rallying American allies to make the deal happen. The administration, in addition to celebrating today, also noting that the work isn't done, that they're still trying to free Americans who are still wrongfully detained in Russia and around the world, those who are not yet home. John.
Natalie Brand at the White House, thank you. And later this evening, President Biden and Vice President Harris are set to greet the now former prisoners at Joint Base Andrews upon their return. Joining us now for more analysis is Ian Bremmer. He is the president and founder of Eurasia Group, a global political risk research and consulting firm. Ian, it's good to be with you. You study diplomacy and relations among nations. So what strikes you about this gargantuan deal?
Two things. One is that one of the big advantages the United States has had in the Biden administration in conducting foreign policy has been the multilateral nature of the response to the Russian invasion. Sometimes it has gone more slowly than people have wanted. There have been times where different countries have dragged their feet, the Germans not wanting to provide tanks, the Americans not wanting to provide F-15s, concerns about who was and wasn't going to be interested in allowing for targeting of Ukraine to hit Russians that were on their side of the border, for example. All those things have happened. But you know what? At every step of this war, the United States and its NATO allies have been in lockstep. The negotiations have been coordinated incredibly well. It's a very complicated thing to do. It's very different than how the Americans left Afghanistan at the beginning of the Biden administration. Also very different from American diplomacy vis-a-vis Israel on the Middle East. But on the Russian war, it's been very coordinated. And that has included, for many months now, the negotiations around this historic and unprecedented prisoner swap. You could not do this with a unilateral approach. You had to have the trust and engagement of all sorts of NATO allies, some like Poland, extremely aggressive in how they think about wanting to take the fight to the Russians no matter what. Some like Germany, extremely cautious, and some like Turkey, actually with relatively useful high-level relations with the Russians, with the Kremlin themselves.
So So are you saying essentially all of the work that was required to respond to the invasion of Russia created a network of relationships and a way of working that then benefited this process that has just taken place?
I'm absolutely saying that, John. I think it makes a huge difference. I don't think this could have happened without the level of trust that, frankly, didn't exist to the same degree before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Remember, I mean, these countries they weren't spending a lot of money on defense for themselves. They weren't coordinating as closely with the Americans. Now they are. This is much more real for them. And that allows you to have a very complicated set of negotiations that can be worked out with not a single leak from any of these countries. I only heard about this late last night. Despite the fact that I work with almost all of these governments at a pretty high level, no one was talking about this as being imminent. You knew that negotiations were ongoing, but that would have been very hard to pull off 2 years ago, John.
That was one of my questions I was going to ask you. It's extraordinary it didn't leak. Let me ask you then, Ian, so this is so do you buy the president's argument that this is an affirmation of a worldview? He said it's vital to have friends in the world. Or is it an affirmation of that worldview with respect to this limited set of challenges that were a part of this deal?
I think it is in between. There's no question that the United States hasn't only built up trust vis-a-vis its NATO allies. One of the biggest Biden successes of his administration has been in facilitating in the Camp David Accords a relationship with Japan and South Korea that was much more challenging in previous years. They were fighting with each other economically, diplomatically, on security issues too. Now you have high-level relations between the three on everything. That's been very helpful. It's a lot of Asian architecture built like AUKUS and the Quad that also would facilitate this kind of multilateral negotiation. But I want to be clear, that's not true on Israel, and it's not true in the Middle East conflict right now. So if you needed to have something like this worked out, in the Middle East, look, you just saw the head of Hamas being assassinated in Iran, the political head, by Israel. America's closest ally didn't talk to the Americans about it before they took that pot shot. The G7 really unhappy about that. So it would have been really hard to pull something like this off in the Middle East going forward, where, by the way, John, we really need it.
Ian, let me very quickly ask you this question, which is Russia being rewarded for bad behavior here, taking Americans and getting what they want?
Absolutely they are. But, I mean, the fact is the United States shows that they really care, not only about rule of law, but about their citizens. And I think that the reality is that doing everything you can to get those people back safe and home is a bigger priority than a Pyrrhic win for the Russians, who aren't going to see the end of sanctions anytime soon, and they're not going to see the end of American support for Ukraine anytime soon.
Ian Bremmer, president and founder of the Eurasia Group. Thank you so much, Ian.
Sure.